Hey guys, this is Fountainhead. Welcome back to another installment of my mixing tricks video series. And today I'm gonna talk about a mix that I did for the most recent Minnemann Project album called The Psychic Planetarium. The track is called A Faint Beautiful Glow, and there's a violin part on it played by the amazing Joe Dennison. Joe, I hope I pronounced it correctly. Um, and I just wanna show you the way that I treated and mixed the violin. So this is the part. Okay, beautiful. And I muted the send and insert effects on the acoustic violin. This is the track that I was sent. Okay, so this violin track was recorded pretty well, um, but the goal that I had in mind for mixing in the violin was to make it sound richer, more analog, smoother, just more expansive. Because I think the performance by Joe is really superb, sublime, and I wanted to go for something that made the violin stand out very much and give it an appearance of, very high definition, three-dimensional, if you will. So I kind of hope I achieved that. Now let me just show you what exactly I did to this track. So the first thing in the effect chain here is the Fabfilter Pro-Q. Pretty much my go-to EQ for subtractive equalization and like surgical things, which you can see here. I've got a low cut around 80 cycles, and I've got a notch filter here at 9.5K. Because there was just a frequency that I found to be very unpleasant. And let me give you a quick A-B. So that was the first thing that we did. Now the second thing is to introduce the virtual mix rack by Slate Digital, which is just an amazing thing. Amazing because it just speeds up your workflow so much. Having all of those different plugins and different combinations and sounds just in one rack system, which you can customize within seconds. And so in this case, I used those three plugins: the virtual channel, the FG76 preamp, and the FG Bomber. The VCC is a console emulation, like an emulation of an analog console channel, and then the FG76 is an emulation of a preamp. And after that, the signal goes into the FG Bomber, being a dynamics processor. And I will introduce those three plugins one after the other, and then I'm gonna do a complete A/B bypass. Again, only very subtle little changes. So what you hopefully could hear was that we now have a more controlled and focused low end. The mid frequencies, mids are just so much richer and come to life a lot more. The high end is a lot smoother, less harsh and unpleasant, and the transients are smoother as well. So as you can see, this is here on 6 dB, this is on 34 dB, and this is on 6 dB as well in the fat mode. So next thing, the Eq5 from Waves, a mid-range equalizer doing pretty much the opposite of what we would do with the Pro-Q, because this is not a plugin for, you know, very surgical little cuts and subtractive EQ, but rather for, you know, additive EQ. So you would boost certain frequencies, but it's very broad brush strokes, so to speak. And in this case, I used this preset called Warm Acoustic. It's pretty self-explanatory. I don't think I even changed the preset very much. So we have a little bit of boosting around 300 cycles, and then cutting a little bit at, or attenuating a little bit at 200. So we emphasize the frequencies that you would associate with warmness and warm, big, you know, full, rich, but we also make sure it doesn't get boomy. So let's do an A-B. Again, very subtle change, but you could hopefully hear that the violin now has more body to it. It sounds fuller and, you know, just a little bit bigger. The next thing in the chain is sort of the sibling to the Eq5. It's the Eq P1a, also from Waves, from the same collection by GGP, and it does the same thing, but not in the mid frequencies, but in the low end and in the high end. And what we're doing here, again, starting with a preset, which I customized a little bit, we attenuate 20K. I mean, obviously we can't really hear what's going on in 20K, but the Q is so high on these equalizers that during these very broad brush strokes, you know, we can definitely hear the effect it has. And together with the 20K attenuation that we're doing here, we're also boosting at 16K. So, you know, when you hear it, you definitely notice a difference, but it doesn't sound like we're boosting 7 dB of anything at all. It's very, very subtle. And this is the great thing about this plugin, that you can do enhancements that you rather feel and actually could, you know, put your finger and say, hey, this is a frequency that's been boosted, or this is the area where it's adding something. You can do a lot of boosting and cutting with this thing without things getting obvious. And the same thing we're doing in the low end, where we're boosting around 100 cycles. On any other equalizer, boosting 100 cycles with 4 dB would sound very unpleasant, but on this thing it just adds the right amount of body and warmth, and obviously the high end, well, you'll hear it. So A-B again. Okay, so one word that would come to mind with this plugin would be expensive, because it makes everything just, if you use it right, it makes everything just, you know, come to life a little bit more, sounds more expansive, richer, and you can use it on all kinds of stuff: vocals, guitars, violin, as in this case. I'm really a big fan of this one. Same goes for the 67 here, the Puke Child, which is an emulation of a Fairchild compressor that Waves does. And what we're going for here is just a tiny bit of dynamics control, compression, but also this plugin introduces some harmonics to the signal, so the sound is not only, you know, easier to control and sits better in the mix, but it also you know, introduces some higher end harmonics, and you can definitely, it's one of those things that you can't really hear immediately, but you can feel the difference. I always say it just comes to life more. I think that's the best way to explain it. All right. I think the compression is more audible than the harmonics, but both of them are there. The final thing in the chain here is another instance of the Pro-Q, because we did quite a lot of boosting in the low and high end of the frequency spectrum of the signal, and to make sure it still sits well in the mix, I'm just gonna control the high and low end just you know, for an additional bit by you know, cutting low cut and high cut. Again, a very subtle difference, and in order for you to hear it, I'm gonna play you back the full mix. You can barely hear a difference, but if you listen very closely and maybe listen several times, you'll notice that it just sits better in the mix. The ambience that I'm introducing comes from the LX480, which is another part of the Slate digital everything bundle, where we also use the virtual mix rack. And there's a preset in it called Ambience, which I like very much because it is not a very audible, overly artificial reverb that just, you know, would make the whole thing drown in a sea of reverb and be very noticeable. Nothing like that. And let me just play you the reverb itself without the dry signal, and then afterwards I'll reintroduce the dry signal. Alright, that didn't work. Okay, classic mistake. Okay, so this is the reverb by itself, and as you can hear, as you can see, I have two other plugins here. The first one is the Slick EQ by Tokyo Dawn Labs, which is a free plugin, and it's amazing. Please download it and show TDL some love. If you want to boost a frequency and don't mind a little bit playing around with a little bit of harmonic saturation with your EQ, this is like the best plugin I've ever seen or heard, because it's very, very subtle. And subtle is exactly what's happening here, because I'm boosting a little bit of high end but it doesn't do much really, just a tiny little bit. Okay, and then speaking of saturation, that's what the Fabfilter Saturn is for as well. Just using the default setting, warm tape, just doing a little bit of grid of saturation and tape distortion. And now let's reintroduce the dry signal. Doesn't sound that much like a big old reverb, right? So it just gives the violin that aura, that little, you know, spark, and makes it sit in the track so much better. And the other thing I used here is a stereo delay effect on bus number 2. And let me do the same thing, meaning that I kill the output of the dry signal for a moment and just play you the effect itself. We only use the stereo delay that comes with Cubase. That's the only thing we need really. Mixed 100% in, panned hard left, hard right. No feedback, no filters. But I've got 2 different delays for left and right. One is 25 milliseconds, one is 15 milliseconds. And because I chose 2 different delay settings, we get this neat little stereo effect. And obviously the goal here is to make the original signal wider, bigger, if you will. And for that purpose, we are exaggerating the effect a little bit with the Bluetooth stereo imager set to full stereo effect. And because that sounds a little bit harsh, I'm having a pretty subtle high shelf here on the Pro-Q. Again, cutting a little bit of low end that we don't need. And this filter here is here because earlier I boosted a lot of, you know, around 300 and 400 cycles in the mid-range, so there's already enough of that coming from the violin. So it just felt better in the overall scheme of things, just attenuating that region a little bit on this effect. Just trust me on this. And let's bring it back in. Okay, that was, I guess, a lot more obvious than some of the other things we did. And now let's hear it in the context of the whole song. First with the bass tracks disabled, and then I'm gonna bring both of those into the mix. Okay, and there you go. As you could hear, all of those subtle little changes that we did and enhancements just worked together as a team to make the violin stand out in, you know, as a solo instrument very much, but still make it sit well within the context of the mix. And I hope I achieved my goal to give it this, you know, expansive, rich kind of sound. I hope you got something out of this. Be sure to try all of these little techniques in your own mixes. If you have any questions or suggestions for other things you want me to show you, just, you know, write a comment. Please like and subscribe. Get in touch on facebook.com Fountainhead Musician, and see you next time.